Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is finally time for a review of the sophomore album from Krewella, zer0. Krewella is an American DJ, production, and vocalist duo, originally hailing from Northbrook, Illinois. Krewella, originally a trio comprised of the Yousaf sisters, Jahan and Yasmin, as well as producer Chris Rainman Trindle, had been making music since about 2007, but really gained popularity in 2011 and 2012 with smash singles like Killin' It and Alive. Admittedly, when I had originally heard the trio's music for the first time, I was a bit turned off by their kind of wild, trashy, in-your-face attitude. As a high school teenager who was kind of cautiously just dipping his toes into the world of EDM for the first time, that look and sound didn't really appeal to me a lot. However, by the time Krewella's first studio album, Get Wet, was ready to roll out, I was pretty into it. I appreciated the album, I guess you could say, for its unapologetically raunchy lyrics and auto-tune vocals, as well as its super fun, festival-oriented productions. Get Wet certainly had some glaring problems, but I genuinely think the album is a relic of its age. While the general sound and style of Get Wet is honestly pretty outdated at this point, it's one of those few albums from 2013 that I can listen to and still have just as much fun listening to it today as I did back then. I mean, even 7 years later, I'm still jamming out to songs like Live for the Night and We Go Down. Shortly thereafter, though, Krewella's producer, Rainman, was forced to leave the group. I know it's a complicated situation, but I think it generally boils down to substance abuse. That entire situation brought out a lot of previously unseen aggression in the Yousaf sisters and led to what is, in my opinion, some of their best music, with all of that pent-up rage and emotion ultimately leading to the release of the Ammunition EP, and in my book that EP was pretty good. Not only did it prove that there was no shortage of producers that wanted to work with Krewella in place of Rainman, with the sisters bringing aboard Pegboard Nerds, Discord, Steven, but it also showed that Jahan and Yasmin were back on their feet and making music that was just as good as ever. It also helps that the accompanying Sweatbox tour that Krewella did in promotion of that EP is literally one of the best EDM shows I've ever seen in my life, with the sisters performing on decks and doing vocals alongside Max Bernstein on lead guitar and Sum 41's Frank Zummo on drums. It was mind-blowing for me at the time. However, beyond that point, with Krewella transitioning from the more in-your-face aggressive stuff to the more soft, poppy, radio-friendly type of stuff we saw on projects like New World Part 1, I started to admittedly lose interest in the project a bit. While I did appreciate the sisters weaving in more of their Pakistani roots into their music, as well as the improvements they made on the vocal front, I just had a hard time getting into the music after they lost that edge. Nonetheless, zer0 certainly was one of the albums that I was most looking forward to in 2020, if only because this is the first album-length project we've gotten from Krewella in 7 years, and ultimately, I would definitely say this album came as a surprise, both a pleasant and an unpleasant one at times. I guess the thing that really isn't so surprising about zer0 is that it does see Krewella very much continuing down that avenue of softer, more radio-friendly pop music. If for some reason you haven't listened to Krewella since 2013, this album is definitely gonna be a culture shock for you, because sonically the sound of zer0 is just so far removed from the stuff Krewella was doing back then. They're honestly going to sound like a completely different act if you haven't been following their progression throughout the last several years. It would honestly be a stretch to even call this album EDM because it's so rooted in really pop music. Of course, the influence of electronic dance music is still somewhat present here. There's a lot of trap influence stuff on this album, for example. However, the conventions of modern pop, specifically over the last 3 or 4 years, are much more present on this album, in my opinion. There's even a song, I think it's Paradise, that reminds me like so much of One Dance by Drake. There's also the matter that zer0 is very non-drop centric, or at least a lot less so than Get Wet. While this album is being marketed as Krewella's big return with their second studio album, I feel like their target audience on this one is very different than that of their target audience on Get Wet. While Krewella's early stuff, you know, Play Hard, Get Wet, and even a little bit of Ammunition, kind of seemed like it was targeting the freaks, the weirdos, the people who didn't feel like they could fit in. zer0 seems to be more focused on creating catchy tunes that 20 to 30-year-old women on a Friday night will be able to sing along to at a nightclub. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with that, I clearly am not in their target audience for this album. However, like I mentioned before, I did find some enjoyment in this album in ways that I didn't really expect to. On the lyric front, for example, some of the songs on this album feel the most Krewella the project has been in ages. Like on the track Mana, which sees the Yusuf sisters getting more aggressive, explicit, and raunchy than they've been since Get Wet, or Good On You, which, although the instrumental is nothing absolutely mind-boggling, the lyrics have a nice, genuine sexuality to them that brings me back to Krewella's early stuff. To complement this album once more, I honestly think zer0 is Krewella's most sonically consistent and cohesive since their very early days, maybe even Play Hard. It is also certainly Krewella's most culturally charged project. The Pakistani, Middle Eastern, and Indian influences on this thing are, you know, all over it. And they do an excellent job weaving in these cultural influences with the styles that they present on zer0. For example, there's a good amount of dancehall on this album, and though that genre originates in the Caribbean, they do a great job of making it sound like something you might hear in the Middle East. I'd honestly say that most of my favorite moments on this album are the ones where Krewella weaves in more Middle Eastern instruments and vocal techniques, whether it's in the context of a more emotional, chord-driven climax like on the opener/title track zer0, or a more groovy, instrumental-driven break on a song like Scissors, or small little melodic details like the sampling of the Arabian riff on Ghost. On a similar front, I can also appreciate how much the sisters have clearly stepped up their vocal game on this album, doing like little licks that I could never have seen them doing, you know, 5 or 10 years ago. Sadly, I don't think there's quite enough moments like this to really keep my attention locked for the entire album's length. I mean, this album's only 35 minutes long. I've listened to songs from Swans that are longer than this entire album, but I still find myself skipping over a good chunk of the tracks here, even some of the better tunes on this album. Because while this album does have some good lyrics, instrumentals, and influences kind of flowing through it, very rarely do those three elements ever coincide on one song. For example, I think Scissors has one of the most well put together instrumentals on the entire album, but the song seriously falls flat for me lyrically. Or Anxiety, which is without a doubt one of the more lyrically substantive songs on the album, but the instrumental is completely bland until like Arrested Youth comes in. I think my favorite song on this album overall is honestly Mana, which is completely ironic because it's the clear song on the album that's like very obviously not targeted toward me. I'm going to close up the review here in a moment, but before I do, I would like to note that I think this album does do a very good job holding itself together in the realm of sonics. However, I do feel like Krewella missed a major opportunity here to tell some kind of story. I got especially excited to listen to this album when I saw its trailer because it kind of made it seem like it was going to go more into the dynamics of sisterhood between Jahan and Yasmin, to give us a look into their lives, their family, the kinds of troubles and tribulations that they go through. And I think the Middle Eastern instrumentals would have been, perfect to play the background to a story like that. A lot of these songs seem to fall into the trap of just being about a relationship, when I feel like they really could have done so much more here. I mean, when you stop and consider the fact that the public has been listening to these women sing for about 9 years at this point, and we still haven't gotten a song beyond Be There that really digs into their dynamic, it feels a little bit weird. It's not really a huge deal for me though. My listening experience with this album wasn't like ruined by the fact that it didn't have a tie-together story or anything like that. I mean, Get Wet was very far from that. If I'm being totally truthful here, I would honestly put this album at pretty similar footing with New World Part 1, given that the sonics and the direction that they're going for on the two projects are pretty similar. zer0 is also quite a bit more consistent, I'd say. There's nothing on the album that I hate quite as much as TH2C, but there's also nothing on the album that I like quite as much as Love Out of Me or Be There. So yeah, for zer0, I am feeling a strong 4.5 to a light 5 out of 10. As always, if you guys haven't listened to this album yet, I have the Spotify link down in the description below, so you can check it out. If you have already listened to it, make sure to let me know what you think about it down in the comments section. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, and you would like to see more content like this, make sure to consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you did enjoy the review, make sure to leave me a like. It really boosts my esteem. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.